Hi, guys, and welcome. My name is Scott Martin, and I'm an LPC and a trauma therapist and a relationship transformation coach. I'm very honored to be asked back to do the Mindfulness Meditation for the third annual Mindfulness Triathlon with Adventum. And I'd like to start out by reading just part of one poem by Mary Oliver. This one part, it's in the poem The Uses of Sorrow, and it reads this. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. I love this line in this poem because it points to what's actually possible for most of us. My story, I was given a box of darkness a long time ago, and that was a childhood of trauma. And for me, it was aspects of emotional and physical abandonment. I had a biological father that I didn't even meet until I was 11 or 12, and then he wasn't present in all the right ways that you would really want. And in the beginning of my childhood, a stepfather that was incredibly toxic, narcissistic, that there was a lot of different varieties of abuse, mental, emotional, and physical. And then there was my mom who, it took me a long time to process her not protecting me from certain situations also, and then allowing me to go live with one and not with her from an aspect of emotional abandonment. So, a lot of good stuff, there. It was painful in a lot of different ways, and it created these patterns of how I moved into adulthood that weren't necessarily healthy. For one, I began to have this white knight imagery that I needed to know the truth about things. Part of that helped me, but the part that didn't help me was I developed this need to be right. And at first it was a need to be right in order to prove them wrong. But the need to be right became a way of filling our human needs. And for me, it was a need for significance. Affirmation in very specific ways because there wasn't a lot of affirmation within my childhood. So you can take a look at how these things are created, and you can see the patterns pretty clearly for a lot of people. For me, what that ended up doing, and this is true for a lot of people here in the United States, is we have this concept of rugged individualism that there's a lot of other countries that sometimes have more groupism, that the bad after effect of that is quite a few people that then don't feel good enough. They don't feel good enough within their rugged individualism. So I'm not enough. I'm not desired. I'm not wanted. I'm not worthy. These type of things. And this is such a common thing, actually, with the amount of people that I've worked with in the mental emotional health arena. It's a felt sense of our own story about us, where we have not done something according to our own rules or what we were conditioned should be the rules that goes against who we should be within this life. And the ridiculousness of that is 99.9% of the time it's absolutely not true. But because somebody convinced us of it, that box of darkness a really long time ago, we still hold that, and neurons that fire together wire together, and a thought becomes an emotion, becomes an expression within the autonomic nervous system, and the body keeps score and it remembers. And so there's an enormous amount of subconscious there that has nothing to do with always that topographical conscious that's telling us who we are and repeating and having these internal thoughts over and over and over again. And so we sure don't want anybody to see that. Right? We don't want anybody to know that that's going on inside anybody else, right? So we put a veneer up. And this is how we reach this ridiculousness of mental health stigma, where it's not okay to be not okay. And we have to change that. We have to shift that because it's becoming very, very important. It's always been important, but it's for us to begin saying it's okay to not be okay. And the reason why that's important is because if we can't say that and we hide, then we create mental strategies to not look at the reality, to move through the discovery process that will organically carry us to transformation. And within the discovery process, moving through these different levels of consciousness of being aware. Well, I'm aware something needs attention. I'm aware, but I'm going to go look over here or do this other thing, right? Approach avoidance. Moving up to the next stage of consciousness is acknowledgement. So not just being aware, but actually bringing attention and going, okay, I'm looking at you now. And then learning all the different ways that you can begin looking to gain more information, because information is energy, and energy will organically carry us through from discovery into transformation. And sometimes it's moving from suffering, where we have no information, into a polarity, where we begin having hope, or we begin realizing that there's situations or there's places inside that we're holding suffering and other places that we're not. That's certainly a much more lenient place than just pure suffering where there's no energy of escape. And then moving into stuckness as well. Being and recognizing that we're stuck with energy is a very different place than just being in a place of suffering. And this is a place that we need to know how to escape. We need information about it, because we're losing people. People need to know how to have energy, how to get the information that they need in order to escape a place of suffering. Because if they don't, they're stepping off the planet. Just in Smith County alone, a couple of years ago, we had a pretty solid piece of literature that came out that showed that of the 20 most populous counties in the state of Texas, that Smith County had the highest suicide rate. And chances are, of many of the people that are listening to this particular talk or this particular event, you know someone. We've had some really, really bright lights, people that you'd never even imagined that they were suffering in the way that they were. They couldn't find another way to escape. The first thing that I want to say to you, other individuals that might be in that predicament, is that if you've been in the pit, or if you are in the pit, then what that really truly means is it means that you have a wisdom, you have an experiential understanding of that pit of pain. And if you have that wisdom, that experiential understanding, when you learn to escape, or better yet, melt that pit and flow back into your authentic state of okay, then what does that make you? It makes you a guide. It makes you a guide, and we need your voice. I'm a 51-year-old white male. The chances that I'm going to get something wrong or say something the wrong way, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And although it's my absolute intention not to do that, when someone else can resonate with you because of your nationality, because of your race, because of your ethnicity, because of your gender, because you represent something that a 51-year-old white male doesn't, then it normalizes. When we have the ability to be vulnerable, vulnerability is the great connector. It creates a social norm that says it's okay to not be okay. So one of the things that I love about this event and the way that it started was its founder, Colleen Long, and the way that she was vulnerable with her story. When she talked about in the interviews her pain and how that drove her to seek these ways of meditation and yoga and these things that gave her the ability to have more information, more energy to escape her place of suffering. That really resonated with me, and I know it resonated with a lot of people. And because she is who she is, she was able to connect with a lot of people with this message, and she continues to do so. We need you. We need you to share your story. And if you were put on this planet for a purpose, if you look at what you've experienced and if it's been a path of pain, then if you had not been through that, then you wouldn't have this experiential wisdom that you could then help people with. Now, you certainly don't have to choose to help people. But we want to make sure that you understand that you have that ability with the wisdom that you've learned through that experiential journey. And because you have that wisdom, boy, do we need you. We need you so, so badly. There are thousands, if not millions of people that are waiting for you in whatever way that you can help. It doesn't mean having to go get a license to be an LPC. Sometimes it means doing art. Sometimes it means having the right conversations with friends and family. Sometimes it means expressing yourself in a business in a way that truly helps people and shares your journey in the best way that you know how. Be the one. Be the one. In this brief section, I want to go over some mechanisms of why mindfulness. What else is also available that's out there that people don't know about? Somatic processing. Mindfulness is paying attention on purpose, without judgment, with loving kindness and compassion for self. That's a big mouthful very quickly, but what it means is we learn how to begin observing what's actually here, not what we tell ourselves is here. And a part of that is understanding that everybody has a range of stress resilience. If we go outside of our range of stress resilience, most of us are not present anymore. When we go outside of our range of stress resilience, we become overwhelmed. And so if we're trying to figure out how to examine what works and what doesn't work, what becomes our number one priority in almost any situation where we're not going to be thinking straight, or we're probably going into a story of illusion, not being present if we're outside of our range of stress resilience, is to come back into our range of stress resilience. Understanding how you measure that and having a series of coping mechanisms that can bring you back into that range becomes very important so that we're showing up in our life. So we're not in a story of suffering, a narrative of suffering in our heads. We're actually in our life learning the art of being here now. There's so much science that's pointing in so many different directions. We now know that if you practice mindfulness or some other version of practicing presence, but specifically mindfulness-based stress reduction has fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging studies showing pre and post data that shows if you develop over a certain amount of time a practice of being present, then it will literally physically enact brain changes. When we are lost in a narrative, in a story, which we as human beings have the ability to be in an abstract version of the future, an abstract version of the past, and even an abstract version of now, where we're just imagining, using these advanced imaginations and these advanced memories to beat the crap out of ourselves almost so many times, right? And so if we're in a story, that's when we go into illusion. That's when we begin creating these rules of how things are not okay and what everything means. When we can come into the present moment, paying attention to something that's in the now, we begin seeing what is. What is neutral. It's something that we can deal with. Our story about what is never neutral. And so which one is easier to deal with and which one gives us more energy? If we have all of this energy of our life force that's going into resisting a story of the world in some way, then we don't have that energy for all these other things that we want to create and connect with. In my story, I had the significance of needing to be right. What I've learned is I've learned how much more valuable to have connection with people. You know, the greatest marriage advice I think I ever heard was from a pastor that says, you know, men, you can be right or you can be happy. and I think what he's pointing to there also is, how are we listening? How are we showing up? How are we being present? How are we protecting our family's heart? How are we protecting our spouse's heart? How? And mindfulness is a process of observation to where we begin paying attention to what's here and asking these questions. One question from a cognitive standpoint, knowing that a thought creates a cascade of neurological activity that then broadcasts within the body in a felt sensation that we know as or label as an emotion, right? So the thought creates the felt sense of emotion, is paying attention to what we're actually feeling in the body. And when we pay attention to what's actually feeling in the body, we've just come out of the story. And so if you want to be really, really good at almost anything, how do you go about that? Practice. That includes musical instruments. You want to be good at the guitar? We practice. You want to be good at a sport, swinging the bat, having that amazing backhand memory of tennis playing? You practice. If you want to be present and not lost in a story of suffering, what do? You practice. This is the reason why we practice mindfulness. And the result, freedom. We want freedom from the thoughts that are creating stories of suffering and the way that we're holding our reality. Stress is not stressful. It's how we hold stress that's stressful. So I invite you to listen to the mindfulness meditation. I also want to make sure that you understand that there are reasons why sometimes it's difficult for people to meditate. There's ways that we approach it, and there's aspects of trauma that show up in very specific way, or emotional conditionings. And I use the word trauma very liberally to describe a mechanism of some touchstone memory where we have upregulated into some version of fight, flight, or freeze, and we have never completed that cycle. Hence, anxiety shows up as a symptom. This is a pattern that can be very fruitful in detective work to figure out how we're holding our life. Are there exceptions to everything? Yes, of course. But when we can take patterns and throw them up on a board and become allies against the patterns, then we can begin moving and creating a new homeostasis, new neural cow paths that create a new cycle of being that moves us towards a life of happiness and joy, which is our natural state. How do we get rid of the blocks that are keeping us from that? Mindfulness is one way. Processing our traumas somatically so that we don't continue handing them off to the next generation, very important. EMDR, SRI, SE, trauma releasing exercises. So a lot of acronyms, I know. TRE, trauma releasing exercises, somatorespiratory integration, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, somatic experiencing, focusing. There's so many new methods, and that's by far not the end of the list, that we've learned that the body keeps score, that there are no painful thoughts, that a thought creates an emotion that is represented within the body. And if you can take the charge in the way the body is reacting with resolution of choice, then it's just a story. That painful story is just a story, and you don't have to carry that around. That's what I want people to know more than anything. If you've been through trauma and you're still carrying around any aspect of grief, sadness, heaviness, a trauma is anytime anything has come at us so hard, so fast, we simply haven't processed it yet. Sometimes that's the loss of an identity. Sometimes that is mental, emotional, physical on a multitude of different levels. You don't have to keep carrying that around. In fact, your natural state, who you really are, is a state of flow where it takes no effort for us to be us. What we want to do is make sure that you understand that there are ways to process to where you can take that defensive reaction, those triggers, and you can reclaim that energy and melt it back into a state of flow where you have access in an energy-rich life to create the life that you truly want. That's what I want people to hear. What's possible? We have the technology to eradicate mental, emotional health issues. We know what to do, and it doesn't include medication. It includes knowing how to heal the cause, not treat the symptom. So please search out the information, ask somebody, YouTube, Google, look up these terms, look up these different modalities, ask people what other modalities. At the moment, we're living in such an amazing time of new discoveries in neurology, psychology, positive psychology, epigenetics, where we're understanding that the way that we use our consciousness is the greatest factor in the environment that instructs the genes on how to express themselves, which includes building the proteins, which includes building the neurons, which includes who you feel you are. And it doesn't take generations to heal. It can take 15 minutes if it's set up the right way with safety and allowing you to have control. So the world is waiting for you. Be the one. When you can take your path of pain and you can take that experiential wisdom and you can escape it and better yet, melt it and turn that stuck energy into energy that you can access to create the life and share with those people that can benefit from your perspective. The world needs you. It needs you, and it needs you to choose. Be the one. We'll see you in the meditation. Take care.